command, my life will shine. In His grace I find my life. Heart full of peace, love in my soul. With Jesus I'm in control.
A bloke in a boat. I'm talking about myself, but you know, the Bible talks about men in boats. And the men in boats speak of revelation, they speak of the testing of their faith, they talk of salvation, talk of deliverance. And when the Bible speaks of men in boats, there's a judgment and mercy and a whole lot of other things that happen around these particular heroes of the Bible. I'm talking about Noah and Moses, Jonah, Jesus, Peter, Paul. You can read about them all. You can read about all their episodes in boats. And I can relate, personally, I can relate to all of them. Although in Moses' case, and I think that's in Exodus 2 and 3, Exodus chapter 2, verse 3, Moses, his family were slaves and they were under sufferance. So his mother chose to make a little basket boat, and sealed it with bitumen. And I can sort of relate to this. Sealed it with bitumen and then put him in the basket and put him in the bulrushes in the Nile. Okay, that sounds harmless enough. But if you really think about it, if you were up north and put your baby in a cradle or in some sort of floating object in one of the rivers in northern Queensland, there would be consequences. And it's the same with the Nile. The Nile had crocodiles, it had hippos, had venomous snakes in the water and on the land. And there was also a lizard, a rather large monitor lizard, a bit like a goanna, but bigger. And the fish in the water, there was a fish called tiger fish, which I've seen in Zambia. It's a big fish, it's like a barracuda, and has teeth like barracuda, but it lives in fresh water. And of course, you've heard of the Nile perch. Sometimes you see them in the supermarkets because they're farmed fish. The perch of the Nile were over 100 kg fish. So once a fish gets that size, it'll eat anything. So it's no wonder Moses' sister stood guard, this little boat, which was really a type of ark. And in that, we had Moses already chosen and selected by being placed in that basket, and he was going to be used by God. He would be called, he was chosen, he'd be called out, as we know with the burning bush experience, and he would ultimately be the human rescuer of the Israelites, all from a boat. A bloke in a boat. Noah, who obviously preceded Moses, was an exceptional man of his time, and we don't realise just how cruel and deceived the world was in the time of Noah. And when the Bible just says in simplistic terms, he was a righteous man, the Israelites already knew about Noah, so they didn't need the big, long description about his character and his behaviour. They knew he was righteous, so they didn't have to write it up. So us, as foreigners, when we read the Bible, we think, oh yeah, Noah's a righteous man. Oh, okay. Yeah, righteous man. Oh, he'd been appointed by God. No, it was because Noah was exceptional. His DNA, he had not been corrupted by hybrid or interbreeding or any other corruption. He was a true Israelite, a true Hebrew, and he was a man that followed God. And And he was the only one, him and his family, him and his 3 sons and daughters and wife, they were the only ones. So when God chose them and brought them out to redeem the world, so to speak, Noah, again, was a man in a boat, chosen, selected, called. And he was there to bring about the salvation of the world, as we know. And of course, we've got Jonah. He was told to go to Nineveh to speak to these people and to warn them about the fact that that they were pagans, but to warn them that God was going to judge Nineveh. And so this is a bit like, I guess, sending one of the people here go out to a mining town out west and evangelise the town to save the town. And the town is full of pagans, drinkers, whatever that they do in mining towns. Jonah is told, go and sort these people out. So he runs away. He gets in a boat and he goes to sleep. But the sea is rough, and the rough sea symbolises really the turmoil that's going on in Jonah. And he's asleep, and all the other men are calling out to their gods. They're more observant of their gods and their spirituality than Jonah is, because he's running away from God. Anyway, they wake him up, and you know the story. The captain says, will you pray to your God? Because everyone is praying to their gods. And if we take a bet with all these different gods, maybe one of these gods will save us. So you pray for your God. And of course Jonah says, look, I've been sent by my God Yahweh to Nineveh, and this storm and this situation is because of God is judging me. Throw me overboard and you'll be safe. And that's exactly what happened. And of course then God says, God must say to himself, oh, here we go again with Jonah. And he sends the fish to pick Jonah up. Again, that's another story I can relate to. And of course, we come into time with Jesus where the boat is used as a platform to teach, and it's also a vehicle to show his own disciples his authority as the Son of God, and also the miracles that he performed in the boat. Okay, now, I guess coming back to myself, back about, when was it? 88, I think it was. 88, I was out of work. I'd been working for a consortium of councils as a sort of an environmental advisor. I was based around that Dysart, Emerald, Capella area, all mining towns. So we were actually living in the middle of that. Now, our younger kids were still at high school. I had a workplace dispute with my employers, and they cancelled my contract. I went to arbitration court, and I won the case for unfair dismissal because while I was working with these different organisations, I showed up a few misdemeanours that they needed to deal with, and they refused. Essentially, what the council at the time was doing, they were spraying sewage on the playgrounds, the sporting fields, and in the school grounds to water the lawns. But of course, what they weren't doing was warning the public and warning the kids. And then I started hearing reports about people having injuries on the grass, cuts or skin knees or whatever, like skin breaks or cuts, and they were getting badly infected. And I put, two and two together. It's obviously the sewage that's being sprayed onto the grass, and people are using the facilities. So anyway, out of that, instead of dealing with it, they decided to sack me. And I wasn't saved at the time. They decided to sack me. We had this arbitration court hearing in January. I was sacked a week before Christmas, and when I rang up my principal authority, they sort of roared with laughter. Then they said, "Oh, excuse us, but this sort of thing seems to happen when we have contractors working in certain areas. They seem to shut our people down a week before Christmas." So they said, send us all the information you can, and we'll proceed with it. Well, cut a long story short, I won't go into all the legal action rigmarole, but the consequences were that I went to court, we won the case, and I was reinstated in the job. But because of the circumstances, I said, I can't take the job back because we've shown the animosity that exists, so I can't work for you as a contractor. Although you've been gracious enough to, cancel the hearing and award the case to me, I can't come back and work. So that was the reason why I was out of work. And this was the first job I had when I came to Australia. It was one of those jobs where you get a house and a car and a well-paid job, and you think, wow, this is fantastic. This will set us up, which it did for a while. But anyway, here I am out of work. And my cousin's got a commercial fishing boat, a licence, fishing boat. He's got about, at the time, I don't know, he had about 7 or 8 licences to fish around the outer coral reef. And you have to have these licences, otherwise you're not allowed to fish commercially. You can only use hand lines, and you can only go to certain areas that were designated in his fishing licence. So he said, I need a decky, need 2 deckies. And so a friend of ours and myself went out on this boat. It was an old prawn trawler with all the rigging ripped off because we were now hand lining. And that was our mothership, so to speak. It was about a 45-foot steel boat. Unsinkable, but, other things can happen to it. And we had 3 tinnies, 3 14-foot tinnies that we ran as dories out the back. So we'd anchor the boat and then fish over the side. Okay, so I'm coming to the point. We're out, we had to wait for high tide. So in McRAE, when you wait for high tide, it means you wait for the high tide at the bar. In this case, the public bar. I wasn't a drinker, but, the skipper, my cousin, and the other decky, they were drinkers, so they waited for the high tide to rise. So we were in the bar, and then about 11 o'clock, it was time, so then we went down and out we went. And it took us about, probably 2 days, 2.5 days to actually get out. What we did was we went north through the islands, Sawtell and those different islands, Hamilton Island, went through those, and then we found the gap in the reef, and then we went out to an outer coral area called the Swain Reef, which is about, 120 k's sort of straight out from Bowen. But we're now outside the reef in the outer ocean. But we're fishing in shallow water, just on what they call a drop-off. So even though we're out that far, we're only fishing in about 2 metres of water, maybe. And we'd anchor the main boat, and we'd get in the tinnies, and we'd spread ourselves out, and we'd just hand line, and we'd just catch fish for about 5 or 6 hours, just as fast as you could move. You just throw the line over, pull them up. It was incredible. And okay, so the fishing part was great. Loved it. I loved being out on the sea. The crunch came, the weather started to change, and the cyclone was starting to develop somewhere between Cape York and that triangle of Cape York, Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea. I'm not saved, and the cyclone's coming in, and we contacted the Coast Guard office and said, where is this cyclone? Because remember, this is 88. Things were not so sophisticated as they are now. So we radioed them up, and they said, "Okay, boys, we know where you are. Stay put." I said, "Well, we can't really go far." And anyway, the cyclone started tracking southeast. So it didn't matter where we went. We were not going to run away from this thing. About half a day, the sea rose. It went from sort of calm, choppy, to sort of, big rollers. This is out in the ocean. And you don't get rollers out in the ocean normally. And I looked at the whip aerial on top of the radar tower on the boat. I said to my mate, I said, "How high is that aerial?" He said, about 60 feet, in what metric terms, what's that, about 15 or 16 metres? And I'm looking at that. I remembered that. He said 60 feet. Because once the sea rose and the wind came up, the boat would roll and lift, then righten itself up again, and then the wave behind us would wash through. It would actually cover the whole boat. You just get a wall of green water. And I look up, and the wave was as big as the aerial, and these are waves after waves. And our biggest worry was we knew we wouldn't sink, but being like a steel bottle or a steel cork, we knew we'd bob, and we were worried about the boat twisting and capsizing. And we actually surfed on some of the waves. They were so big. I've got to hand it to my cousin, Skipper. He knew what he was doing. He could really handle that boat and that weather. Anyway, we found a gap in the reef, because the reef is like a big concrete wall. You can't come through. You've got to find the right passages. So we had to sail north for probably about 4 or 5 hours in this real wild, heavy sea. And we finally found the gap, and we came through where a lot of the oil boats and meat boats come through. So that would have put us up almost towards Townsville. But still about 100 or so k's out. So we come through the gap, and we find a small atoll inside the first run of the reef, and the waves are hitting the reef, forming up, and they're coming through as foam and sort of like a tidal surge, but it's still coming through about 2 metres high. So the boat is still rocking and rolling, and we put down 3 anchors to hold the boat. This is a steel boat, which worked, but of course that was in the evening, so we couldn't really see what we were doing. By morning, the cyclone was then up north, coming down the coast, heading towards Cairns, running parallel to the coast, but still in a direct line towards us. In the night, all the tinnies had gone, so all the gear and the outboards, 20-horse outboards on the tinnies, they just flew away wherever they went. And half the gear that we had on the deck had been all blown away as well. So it's getting pretty serious. We call up the Coast Guard, and they say, "Well, yeah, boys, we know where you are. Just call us every 3 hours so we keep track here. We can't come near you. We can't do anything. Just ride it out if you can." And so, yep, the cyclone's still coming down southeast. There's no way we can run away. So we're sitting there, and I'm thinking, "Oh, this is getting really serious." Then we talked about all sorts of silly ideas, and I can understand when men are in dangerous situations, like in battle or they're in some sort of stressful thing, you will do the utterly ridiculous to try and sort yourself out, because we're not asking God for help. We're just thinking, what do we do now? And we talked about all different options about what we could do with the boat: sink it down in the water to make it into like an air raid shelter, so that it'd be on the bottom with about 1/2 metre headspace inside the cabin, where we had breathable air, and then the waves and the wind would just blow straight over the top of the boat, and then would raise the boat later somehow. There were other stupid ideas we came up. It was getting wilder and wilder. This wind, the boat was actually vibrating. The rigging was humming. It's a bit like guitar strings, sort of the harmonics. It's gone zzz, there was this constant sound on the whole boat. The deck was covered in seabirds. It was just like being in a chook house. You could walk around, there were gulls and other birds on the deck, and you could just, you could sort of just push them with your feet and they'd just shuffle, and they weren't scared of us. I was scared because I think, what am I going to do? So I think this is about the second night, and I'm inside the boat. We've got we've got the door and the window shut, and the boat's just pitching and tossing and rolling all the time. Nothing is still; it's just everything is constant movement. And I thought, oh boy, what do I do? So, out of desperation, I think I said the Lord's Prayer about, I don't know, 100 times, 200 times, whatever it was. I just kept repeating it over and over and over again. I didn't know how to pray, but I remember learning the Lord's Prayer sort of in, I don't know whether it was primary school or kids' Bible class but I remember, and I just kept repeating it over and over and over. And obviously God heard me the first time. And when you're desperate, you make a deal with God. You say, God, if, God, if I'll go to church. Now, I've in my early days, I was in an Anglican church choir. It was actually a cathedral in Hamilton, New Zealand. That's another story. But anyway, I did this deal with God. I said, Lord, get me home and I'll go to church. And he must have said, right, heard you the first time. So the sea of turmoil, just like Jonah, and then the decision to turn to God. That was my moment of waking up and realizing, there's a greater creator and force, the one who calms the waters, peace be still, as Jesus said, and even the disciples in the boat, who were all fishermen, they couldn't understand the authority and the power that Jesus had when he spoke to the water. I didn't quite have that power or authority to speak to the water, but interestingly, while I was praying, the cyclone stopped. It didn't disappear. This cyclone tracks, it goes zigzag and it pauses and whatever. So I guess this was a time where it was resting. I think it was somewhere close to Townsville at the time, but still out on the water. And it actually was stationary there for about half an hour to an hour. And roughly about the time I was praying, I wasn't saved, so I didn't connect the dots. But it stopped, and the sea went sort of relatively calm, almost like an eye of the storm. And then about an hour or two later, then the wind started to pick up again. And what happened was that the cyclone was going, which way were we facing? Southeast. So it didn't matter where we went, we were going to get blown off the water. So what happened, the cyclone went that way, did a right angle turn, and it went due west. So it actually turned away from us, which, again, I didn't get the significance. But when it went across the land, it went across about Home Hill area. And when it went across there, there were people in a riverbed or trying to drive a truck through a riverbed. They actually got drowned by a big wall of water when the cyclone went through there. So 3 people got drowned when that cyclone crossed the land round about Home Hill. And of course the other side of the story was the sea was still rough. Even though the cyclone passed by, we still had to wait nearly a week for the sea to calm down, because we couldn't move through the reef because it was too rough. Just had to sit tight until the water level dropped and all the wind and everything else. And then we came home back to McRAE. And of course Margaret, I guess at the time, thought I was out on the fishing boat, drinking beers and laughing and catching fish and being a hooligan, not realising that, hey, it was a life and death situation. But anyway, I came back ashore, beautiful sunny day, and we still had a load of fish on board because we caught a lot of fish. And this was a commercial boat, and we had the freezer under, below deck. So we still had a lot of fish on board, so the trip wasn't a total loss. But anyway, Marg says, oh, she's just joined a church in McRAE. And I've never been averse to going to church, even when I wasn't saved. People would invite me, and Margaret, in the early days, she'd say, oh, I'll come to church with you. So I'd go. I had no worries about it. And so she said, look, I've found this new church. So along we went. This is the first Sunday back on land, and they have an altar call. And I thought, well, okay, I better go up the front. So the pastor prays for me, and he says, there you go, Neil. You've accepted Jesus, you're saved. I thought, what? There's no lightning or thunder. But nevertheless, that was the situation. And they're packing the hall up, putting all their gear away. And he had a Roland piano there. And I picked it up to put it in the back of his car. And he yells out to his wife, the pastor's name was John and his wife's name was Rose. He says, hey, Rose, we got anybody to play this thing while we're away? Because they hadn't had a holiday for 4 years. And she said, no, there's no one in the church can play it. There's a church of about 70 people. And I'm holding this thing, and I looked at the pastor and I said, I'll play it for you. That was a mouthful, 30 odd years ago. And he says to his wife, Rose, give him all the songbooks. So I'm standing there holding this keyboard, and there's songbooks are piled up on top. And there's Bryce is leading, talk to him, and they were going to be away for 2 weeks. That was it. And I'm still here. Hallelujah. But if you could imagine, I learnt classical piano as a kid, and I learned it to quite a high level. I didn't like playing classical music, but it was a technique for me to learn to play the piano. So I sort of persevered, in playing. But obviously, God was sort of preparing me for that time. And he says, okay, boy, you're not in church now. You're going to go out in a boat, and I'm going to do a few things, and you're going to call out to me, and then you're going to make a deal with me, and then you're going to come back ashore, and you're going to do this. And it's interesting. I relate to these stories of these men in boats, and God called them out, and they responded. Obviously I was a bit of a slow learner, but same thing. Years later, here I am standing and sharing with you. I couldn't stand in front of people. When I was learning piano, the only person I could play for was the piano teacher, or when I did piano exams. In church, I'm still a shy person, and for me this in McRAE, for me to get up front and to play, let alone a song lead, I had to look at the ceiling all the time, or look at my feet. If I saw people's eyes, that just threw me up. But hey, God gives you strength. Hey, He gives you a calling, a gifting. He enables, and it's staggering what God can do. And just very, very quickly, I'll just talk about another boat. When Marg and I came back from Japan, we went to a birthday party up in Caloundra. Another cousin. These Maoris have got cousins everywhere. Another cousin, and it was her birthday party. We met a lady there who we hadn't seen for years. We'd met her in Redcliffe at CSC. She was actually, I guess you'd call her a Messianic Jew, a very beautiful, gentle lady. And she's talking to Marg and I. She said, well, I haven't seen you guys for years, which was right. She hadn't seen us for 10 years. And she said, what are you doing? And we said, well, we've just met a Maori evangelist who's invited us to the Solomon Islands. We've come back from Japan. We've only been back 6 weeks. We don't quite have enough money for the airfare and accommodation, whatever. And she says, this is a Saturday at the birthday party. She says, my son has a 64-foot catamaran and he's sailing to the Solomons on Monday and he wants crew. And we went, what? I said, I'll go. And anyway, we sort of had the birthday party and great fun and all the rest of it. By this stage, all Christians too in the birthday party. Bit of a change from earlier days. And anyway, Monday morning, 8 o'clock, the phone goes. Fella Clayton, the son of the lady who we saw at the birthday party. Clayton, you want to come on the boat to the Solomons? Okay, so what about Margaret? And I said, oh, I think we'll put a bit of money together and she'll fly over. He said, well, there's room on the boat, she can come. And he said, have a talk about it and I'll call you back in an hour's time. Margaret's thinking, I think God wants me to go on the boat. Margaret doesn't like boats that much. Well, she'll go out on the water here, but out on the ocean, on an ocean-going yacht is a different ballgame. And it was. Anyway, she says, God's told me I need to go on the boat with you. Okay. So sure enough, Clayton rings back and he says, Margaret coming? I said, yep. And okay, cut a long story short, we're in the boat and we're heading to the Solomon Islands. What God opened up in the Solomon Islands in opportunities, we ended up getting a work permit through a Christian community that we started working with. And we actually ended up using that work permit to work with several different Christian groups. So that was the door opener. And we ended up being in the Solomons for 3.5 years. You know, if you look at the Bible stories about men and boats, is that this whole thing of salvation and calling and bringing out giftings and enablements and all this sort of thing. It just you can see it there in each of the Bible heroes, and that doesn't put me or Margaret in the category of Bible heroes, but it just puts us in that situation of saying, yes, God, we'll do it. Yes, God, we'll go. What do you ask of us, we'll do, Lord. And he opens the doors, he provides the food, he provides the accommodation, he provides the people, the help. God is amazing. God really is good. Eh? Amen? Amen. And it applies to all of you sitting here. All of you have got a calling on your lives. And the reason I say that is because you walk through that door. You're obedient enough to walk through that door, which means you've answered whatever has been prompting you. The Holy Spirit has prompted you to come through that door.
God in command, I live in peace. In His love, I find my release.